You are listening to the Enormocast.
La Sportiva presents Story Time. There once was a little boy named Tommy Caldwell. One day, little Tommy decided he wanted to climb a really big wall, but he couldn't find any shoes to climb the big wall in. So he decided to build his own out of Scotch tape, fluffernutter, and a used pair of hand jammies left behind by a couple of Euros in Camp 4. When those didn't work, Tommy called the adults at Sportiva and asked them for help. Sportiva came up with the TC Pro, named after little Tommy himself. A shoe so good at big wall climbing that little TC grew up to climb the hardest, biggest big walls in the world in his TC Pros. Then he talked his best friend, teeny tiny Alex H, into trying them, and Alex, well, he became a pretty good climber too. So if you want to be like TC or Tiny A, go to Sportiva.com or your favorite mountain shop and check out a pair of TC Pros. And maybe someday you'll grow up too. The end.
Are you stuck in the partner zone, where that person you climb with is blithely unaware of your electric longing that's telegraphing through that stiff gym rope? Does she think of you as just another dude she schools in the bouldering cave? Does he tell his friends you're just like one of the guys? Well, break out of the partner zone and let that person know that your rock is in a hard place with a special gift from PeterWGilroy.com. Because if you thought making sure her chalk bag was always full, or buying him a set of cams for his half birthday would bring out the passion, you're wrong. Do it the right way and go to PeterWGilroy.com for rock-inspired jewelry and accessories that say, to me, you're more than just a solid belay, baby. And of course, remember to enter Enormo at checkout for a discount.
Listen, where are you playing in town? Are you playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
a
the big place that side of town. That's a big
nice
place. You sold it out. 20,000 seats.
You really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Bad weather. Now or later, anytime for climbing.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is about 10:30, April 1st, 2018, and this is episode 148 of the Enormocast, a conversation with Hugh Herr. So we have a lot to talk about before we get to the interview. I had a little bit of a limited window with Mr. Herr, and so I didn't want to get too into recounting his accident back in 1982, even though it is a very important part of the interview and of his life then and now. But, just going through the details, I thought maybe we could take care of that here in the intro and not have him recount that, as he's done, endless times over the last few decades. So before we get to the interview, I think it's important that we talk a little bit about some of the details of what happened to Hugh back in 82 on Mount Washington. And my generation of climbers, we all kind of knew about this, I think. It's definitely in the lore, but maybe has become a little bit of old history that some people don't know about. So maybe you know some of the details. I'm just going to do a little book report about it now to get you guys sort of positioned for the rest of the interview. But what basically happened is Hugh and his partner, Jeff Batzer, were going climbing on Mount Washington in Huntington Ravine, going up to do some ice climbing in January, way back in 1982. Both of them experienced climbers, both of them very experienced ice climbers. But as they finished the route and headed to the summit, they were caught in a severe storm, a whiteout, very high winds, hurricane winds, as they call them. But Mount Washington can have notoriously horrible weather, and in fact, Huntington Ravine has been the site of many fatalities over the years. These guys both survived, but on the way down, they got super lost, and basically ended up descending kind of the wrong side of the mountain into what Hugh Herr called in one interview the wilderness side of the mountain. And nobody knew where they were. They didn't know where they were, and they basically ended up in a snow cave or some semblance of a snow cave for 3 nights. And severely cold weather, -20, no bivy gear, and just hugging each other and hoping for rescue. And eventually, actually, in their own words, giving up on that, and they basically stopped hugging each other, thinking that perhaps dying quicker would be much, much better. But finally, a woman who was affiliated with the rescue team, not out as a rescuer, but knew what was going on, found some tracks and ended up finding the 2 men 3 days later. And they were rescued before they died. But the important part of this story, or as Hugh talks about it when we get into the interview, one of the main and most significant parts of this story, is that 2 of the rescuers during the search were caught in an avalanche, and one, Albert Dow, was killed in that avalanche. And as we'll find out, that played a huge part in what Hugh did with the rest of his life. Knowing that this man had died trying to save him was a great burden on Hugh Herr for many a decade, and continues to motivate him to be who he is today. So during their descent, Hugh had fallen through some ice and into a creek that they were following, actually a couple times, and even with his partner giving him wool pants, eventually Hugh's legs froze, and in fact both men received severe frostbite. And in the aftermath, both men lost body parts. Jeff Batzer lost a foot, as well as toes on his other foot and some fingers off of his right hand. I believe it was his right hand. And then Hugh Herr lost both legs from the knee down. They had frozen by the time they were rescued. So that starts to catch us up to the interview. But what happened with Hugh is that he decided to keep climbing, and he began to tinker in his own garage and in machine shops with prosthetics that would help him climb. And in fact, pretty quickly after his amputations healed, he started climbing again using various prosthetics that he was designing himself. And the one wild thing is that he basically started to tailor a lot of these prosthetics that he was creating to the climbing that he needed to do. You know, making his feet edge better for certain climbs, using crack kind of designed feet for fitting in cracks. He put crampons on them for ice climbing. He made them longer so he could be taller. He says he can be anywhere from about 5 feet to about 8 feet tall, and he started using those to climb. And in fact, became in a lot of ways a better climber after his accident in terms of rock climbing. In the year following his accident, 1983, he establishes Vandals, one of the first 513s, one of the first on the East Coast, and established that with Lynn Hill and Russ Clune. And then went on to establish a route called Stage Fright, an RX route, 512 RX route at Cathedral Ledge, and also did a second ascent of a route called City Park out in Index that was 513C, keeping in mind that in 1986, 513C was right at the top of the grades. So in the interview, as usual, we don't run down his resume, but I thought I'd hit that up here because it's pretty astounding what he went on to do. And in his own mind, when people started to sort of accuse him and grumble about cheating because his, lower half of his body was lighter and he could customize his feet to do what he needed them to do on the rock, he actually thought that was great when people started accusing him of cheating, and that he thought it meant that finally they'd accepted him and accepted his disability. And once they started competing with him, he knew he was back. So now Hugh Herr is a professor at MIT, and probably the most famous person that's ever been on the Enormocast, I think, just in terms of worldwide fame. He is one of the top engineers and researchers in this field in biomechatronics. Yeah, bionics, basically. So, yeah, essentially he loses his legs when he's 17, decides that he's going to be better than he was, and then he's gone on to basically change the world. So that's what we're talking to today. And if you guys get interested in this guy, please just go Google him. There's so much to find out about this fascinating man, what he's done with his life, and the amount of suffering that he's alleviated when people are losing limbs, soldiers, athletes, anybody really. It's pretty amazing stuff. So go down that rabbit hole. You will not be disappointed. But start here with an interview on the Enormocast with Hugh Herr. I don't know what's happening in your neck of the woods, but out here in the great American West, it's the start of desert crack season, which means two things. The bros are charging up their Bluetooth speakers, and people are wondering where the hell they're going to get enough cams. But Black Diamond has your back. On top of the heap are the Camelot Ultralights. Cams so fleet that Elon Musk once shot one into space strapped to a bottle rocket. And then there's the venerable C4, the cam that still rules the creek. And legend has it, if you whisper Camelot, Camelot, Camelot into a mirror while holding a red C4 to your forehead, the location of the easiest for you 12- will be revealed. But wherever your crack reveals itself, remember, BD has you covered with the sweetest cams known to man. Check them all out at blackdiamondequipment.com or your favorite local shop.
I'm smiling because my identity is has shifted so much from my climbing days.
You know, I joke on this about doing minimum research when I get into these situations with people, but I do end up looking at what I can find out, and it's interesting because your Wikipedia page, it does list climber first. My question, I guess, is a little bit about your evolution as a climber. What brought you into it? What consumed you about it, and then a little bit about maybe we get to what it means to you now in terms of this. You've got these multiple identities.
Great. So I started climbing when I was 6 or 7 years old in the foothills of Lancaster County near the Susquehanna River. I got into it. My brothers and I saw I think it was a television program of showing someone climbing, and we were enthralled and raced out and bought how-to manuals and went to these slimy, moss-covered crags in Pennsylvania and went at it. And then it quickly progressed to the Schwellengungs every week. I was climbing as often as I possibly could, given that I was in middle school and high school. Yeah, I absolutely developed a passion. Climbing is hard with a capital H, and I like to do hard things. I like to be all consumed by a passion, by a discipline, and to see on what boundary I can put myself upon in terms of performance. I was a strange youth, to say the least. I studied Zen and I studied meditation. I was extremely disciplined. I didn't have very many friends.
And we're talking like even, teenage or younger.
Was. I mean, I started climbing when I was 6.
Yeah.
When I was 8, I climbed Mount Temple in Alberta. It's 11,000 some foot mountain. When I was 11, I started to do some things in the rock world that were interesting. The sort of first youthful ascent, if you will.
Sure. I was just trying to position, like you said, you were an odd youth, and that would be kind of strange at an age like that to be looking into these disciplines.
Yeah, sort of 13, 14, 15. I was reading Zen and the Art of books, archery and tennis and all kinds of stuff.
Did you have someone that was like the gateway to that got you there, or was it something
I don't believe so.
Your parents, right?
That's right. My poor parents. So I was a bit autistic, and I would sit for hours and hours and hours alone in the basement of the family home, and I would just sit there and rock back and forth. And what was I thinking about? It was this elaborate fantasy world about the future. I always live in the future, but it was like visions of what would be possible in climbing and beyond climbing, as I would rock there in this soothing rhythmic pattern. I was also reading Carlos Castaneda, Tales of Power, The Separate Reality. I was also reading Tolkien. So I was in this realm of fantasy, life and death, adventure type literature. I'll never forget that the day I free soloed Boogaboo Spire in British Columbia. again, I was steeped in this literature of mysticism and Zen and meditation, and I woke up early that day, and I hiked up the whole way and scrambled up to the col at the base of the northeast ridge of the Boogaboo Spire, and I thought I saw a shadow to my side, which was a sign that a precursor of death from my readings. So okay. I decided to descend. So I went the whole way down to the hut. And I was sitting there twiddling my thumbs, and about noon I got terribly bored, and then I went up and did it.
Yeah, the sun is, no more shadows anyway, right?
Right. So yes, a very, very strange youth.
I asked this when I talk to a lot of people who start out climbing very young and progress into a level as high as you did. That's really common today. I mean, the best climbers in the world are those people now. But in that era, that's you were unusual in the sense of being that young. And then also I always like to ask about the interface with adults, because a kid who wants to climb in those days, unless you've got your best bros that are progressing right with you, you always end up running around and climbing with adults.
That's right.
Especially at an early age. So what was there? You said you didn't have a lot of friends as a kid. How were they perceiving what you were doing? Not just this literature and all these thoughts. Maybe you weren't sharing them, but also, going and climbing these things by yourself at such a young age, was that raising a lot of eyebrows? Were they accepting, or was it easy to climb with older climbers? I don't know how much older is Russ than you are.
Russ Clune?
Yeah.
Substantially.
Yeah. So here you are partnered with these guys like Russ,
Right.
But they're used to weirdos, in the climbing world. So
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I said I had few friends,
mm-hmm.
I did have. I really meant few friends of my own age.
Mm-hmm.
I did have close friends, of folks that were much older than I was. Russ Clune being an example. I think Russ would, sometimes he would say, "Hugh, you're so effing strange," and he'd laugh.
Yeah, he'd laugh. Sure. Yeah.
But I had a wonderful childhood. I would not replace it with any other person's childhood. It was just complete saturation of adventure and joyous adventure.
Yeah, and so then my other question in the terms of that is always, what were your sort of parents' attitudes towards, again, the young age, disappearing and running around?
Yeah, I was the baby.
Okay.
I am the baby. It's hard to imagine. I'm so old now.
No, it never changes. So
I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Okay. When you have 5 kids, you kind of give up in the last one. So I had all this freedom from my parents because they were off working, and I don't think they had a clear sense of what I was doing. In fact, I'm sure of that. Until later, of course. Right. Every weekend I would do anything possible to get to the Gunks. Obviously, I wasn't able to drive. I wasn't 16 yet. So I would hitchhike. I would convince my older brother, Tony, to drive. I would, call everyone in the region to hop a ride. So, and I would, during that period, I was not, as you would say, ambitious in the realm of academics. In fact, I did everything that I could to get out of the classroom. And because of that, I studied vocational school, because that afforded me 3 hours midday to go climbing and train.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. I went to my 5-year high school reunion, and this was after I was through MIT and was through Harvard, and people were like, "What happened to you?" It's that you cannot be the same person that was sitting in the back row and performing poorly in academics in middle school.
I taught high school for a while. It sounds to me, you were just a classic kid who had the aptitude, not the interest, or just
Absolutely. I was completely bored and did not want to be in school.
Right. Yeah, and a good teacher can recognize that, but there's not always a lot they can do about it. You know, I mean, the system is the system, and a good teacher can help somebody like you, but sometimes, I mean, it just.
Yeah.
You're like beyond help in that sense of, you know, he's going to find his way one day, but it's not going to be here at 12:30 in English class. So,
right.
Yeah.
There was a glimmer of hope in 8th or 9th grade in algebra. At the end of the course, there was a national exam that we all took to rate my particular high school, that particular class, and so on. And I guess I got something out of the term because I scored the highest in the class.
Right.
And again, so I was sitting in the back of the class, and I remember when the scores were announced, the entire class turned around and stared at me.
Right.
And the expression was, "How the hell did you cheat?"
Right. Yeah. I think, I'm sure some kids recognized, what they were looking at. But let's skip ahead and can you tell me where climbing is in your life now?
Yeah, so on rare occasion, I do go climbing. I enjoy going to the Italian Alps. I love the culture and the food, and I love the limestone and the easy access to really remarkable, steep, somewhat dangerous rocketeering. So, I mean, I try to get there every year, but it's often every 2 years, to be honest. So climbing, doesn't play a dominant role in a physical sense in my life today.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still a climber philosophically, and I think the climbing mentality motivates a lot of my scientific work.
Okay. And is that what you mean by philosophically?
Yes.
Like it's the challenge is reapplied in a sense to other places.
Just the climber the extreme climber that balances technique, physicality with the psychological dimensions of controlling fear and risk taking, but not trying to walk that fine line between acceptable risk and unacceptable risk. So scientifically, I also try to walk that line. And it's interesting, in my head, when I'm thinking about scientific projects, I visually see myself in my mind climbing and kind of making progress from edge to edge and ledge to ledge, as an analogy.
Right. That's exceptional. That's cool. I was hoping that, coming here today, I'm like, I don't really know what his relationship with climbing is anymore. But, as a lifer myself, and, I find the same kind of, it's always going to sort of be there. And that's cool to hear that. So going back, I've been climbing since 1989. And I remember, the first time I ever understood who you were, it was the images of you climbing with the prosthetics, which were awesome and mind-blowing. But then I started to look into what you'd done and what you have done, and or what we're doing, and included, some really dangerous climbs.
That was was my forte.
Oh yeah, and I wanted to ask you that, and this kid with this incredible inner world, and you said these heroic literature and life and death literature, and was that all? Do you think it's all connected to becoming this guy who was up there climbing on these,
absolutely,
touch and go, don't screw up sort of climbs?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a mixture of how to achieve peak physical performance. So in that regard, I had a whole meditation and visualization process where I would imagine what the sequence would be just by looking from the ground. And I would imagine the sequence of my body and the sequence of gear. And I would meditate on that and then climb. And often I would often be correct in my vision, and you just flow and turn your mind off in this Zen-like fashion. And the other piece of it was control of fear, that the meditation and was very helpful with as well. But through that process of study, I very early was free soloing, up to 5'11s and climbing a lot of 5'12, 5'13 with the X rating.
Yeah, because I definitely remember that stuff being connected to your name when I was first reading magazines and checking it out. How old were you when you guys got lost?
I was 17.
You were 17 only?
Correct.
Right, and so...
Just recently. My birthday's in October, so I was in early 17.
And so at that point, you'd still been climbing for 10 years. And where were you as a climber at that point before that? I mean, we've been jumping around, so where were you as a climber when that happened?
I was peaking in the rock world and considered this child prodigy, doing first descents in the Schwellengunks. I had recently done a trip to Yosemite Valley, where I'd done a Separate Reality and Astroman and really fast times.
And we're talking like 81, right? Because
correct.
81, 82 is when this all happened. So,
right.
I mean, so Astroman is, no mean feat at that point.
Yeah, and we did it
for a 16 or 17-year-old.
We did it in 3 hours or something without falling.
Who's we? Who were you climbing with in those days?
Steve Grossman, I did Astroman with.
Right.
My brother was also with me on that trip.
Yeah, and he was a good climber?
Yeah, Hugh Herr. Yeah, he's a good climber.
Yeah, cool. So that's where you were, and then, to just reiterate, the lost in a storm on Mount Washington. And correct me if I'm wrong, 3 days.
3.5.
3.5 days. One rescuer was killed. Avalanche, I believe.
Albert Doe.
Yeah. And then, due to frostbite, both of you lost. Who were you with again?
Jeff Batzer.
Lost parts to frostbite, and you lost both your legs from about the knee down.
Right. Jeff had damage in his hands and his feet, and had some fingers amputated as well.
And so, again, not to belabor all the details, we'll get them in the beginning, but it's cliche sounding, but this is the thing that puts you where you are now in terms of a life-changing event. And at 18 years old, or 17 years old rather, I kind of started, when you were talking earlier, one of the big things when I read about this, and in my generation, we all read about it and we all knew about it. And, the 3 days and 3.5 days is an intense thing to think about, being lost and getting colder and colder and colder. But then I started thinking, I just heard about meditation and how this kid had brought himself to this place. Putting yourself back there was this a part of your survival when you were out there? This preparation that you had sort of inadvertently done for a situation like this?
I believe so, and also a dance, a tease with death. In my free soloing and dangerous rock climbing, doing routes with very little gear. I certainly thought about falling to my death often. Mm-hmm. But it was somewhat in a romantic sense that, as young men often think about death. On the mountain, I was like, okay, this is it. I've thought about this many, many times. Here it is. And just, again, I think the notion of having faced dangerous situations many, many times, having faced death many, many times, one doesn't panic. It's sort of like, here I am again in a very difficult situation. In a situation like being in minus 20 degree temperatures and wind chills, very, very severe, and the snow depth on average was to the waist, sometimes to the chest. Panic is your worst enemy. If you panic, you'll definitely die. So that was very helpful, yes.
Mm-hmm. And in the aftermath, again, trying to kind of, get into your head a little bit, so you guys got out, you're hospitalized, surgeries, rehab, all these things. Where was your head immediately afterwards in terms of looking at, your future? I'm sure being told never climb again or never maybe walk again. I mean, the way doctors deal with that seems a little bit radical a lot of times, but, these pronouncements. But for some reason, I always do this conjecture psychology while I'm doing these things, but I almost imagine it just bouncing off your head and being, how soon were you resolute about your future and what you were going to be capable of doing after that?
Yeah, I never met anyone with artificial limbs.
Right.
And so I didn't have a clear sense of what life would be. There was one fellow that visited me, and clearly I could see that walking was possible. Mm-hmm. When I got into the rehabilitation center after my limbs were amputated, and I spoke to my rehabilitation doctor, I sheepishly asked him, what would I be able to do in a physical sense? And he asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to drive my car, I want to ride a bicycle, and I most certainly want to return to my chosen sport of mountain climbing. And without any thought or without hesitation, he rattled off that I'll be able to drive a car, but with hand controls, and I would not be able to ride a bicycle, and most definitely not return to climbing. I think I cried for 24 hours, and then I awoke, and it came to me that it was really silly for him to say those things, because a he didn't know me. I can be a pretty tenacious fellow, and B, he didn't. Even back then, I realized he didn't understand the nature of technology. Technology is an invariant; it improves in time. And if something's not possible today, well, it's going to be possible tomorrow, most likely. So his claim to a 17-year-old that something would forever be impossible was absolutely ridiculous. So thankfully, I had that perspective, and I didn't believe him.
At what point did you then also decide that not only are you going to depend on this evolution of technology, but you're going to create it? How soon was that decision made sitting there?
So remember that to get out of academics before the Mount Washington accident, I signed up for vocational school. So I actually knew my way around machine shops.
Oh, right on.
And I could build stuff. So I started tinkering and designing, and very quickly I realized that I had an opportunity, that there was this part of my body that was missing, and in that space I could create anything. And as a young man, I imagined a future world in which I could create elaborate structures within that space. Not only return to climbing, but perhaps limbs that will enable me to run faster than a person with biological limbs can achieve. Maybe limbs that don't look like limbs, limbs that have wings and I could fly. So as a young man, I fantasized about this future realm and began marching in that direction by cutting and grinding and sculpting artifacts that I would wear on a sense.
How soon was it, again, you were 17, how soon was it, do you remember, till you did your first attempt at climbing again with something that you had made?
I was in the rehabilitation center, so I was fitted with artificial limbs, and they were made out of plaster, believe it or not. And they told me, even if you can walk without canes or crutches, please don't do so, because the limbs may fracture under your weight. So I was fitted with artificial limbs. The first weekend, they allow patients to go home during the weekend. The first weekend, they were smart. They did not allow me to take the limbs with me.
Don't give this kid the limbs. We will never see him again.
They left their guard down and allowed me the opportunity to take the limbs. And I went climbing. So Tony, my brother Tony, and I went climbing. And the challenging part was getting to the base of the crag, because walking was very painful and challenging. I think it was like an octogenarian with two crutches, or two canes rather, going down this dirt path. But once I got onto the vertical world, and once I became quadrupedal, it felt really nice. It felt natural, far better and more natural than bipedal walking. And I revisited at that time really the passion that I have for climbing, the joy. Even though it was only 5'9", I was just enthralled and to be out there.
Mm-hmm. How painful was walking at that point?
It was very painful.
Right.
I'll never forget my first step. It was within parallel bars in a rehab facility. And I had, of course, very strong arms, so I kind of pressed up, pushing myself up using the parallel bars, and then slowly relax my arms and put weight on my legs. And I think I screamed at how painful it was. But the experience with artificial limbs, it's a very steep learning curve, if you will. It gets better fast. Mm-hmm. So you start out in this very pathetic point, but it does get better very, very, very fast.
So, when you started tinkering, as you said, and putting these things together, that was for you. How soon? Yeah, when did you start to think about this could be? I have this aptitude here. I have this opportunity, and I can start doing this for other people if I study and I
much later. So so it was painful to walk and to stand for long periods of time. Mm-hmm. My entire family, at least the men in my family, are in construction.
Okay.
So I was looking at that future career, and which involves, of course, construction sites, being on one's feet all day long. And I realized, that's probably not a great idea. And I actually tried it for a year or so with artificial limbs, and then I considered going back to school, going back to college. And the problem is I never paid attention in high school. So if you asked me what's 10% of 100 when I graduated from high school, I wouldn't be able to tell you, because I had no idea what a percent was.
Okay.
So I grabbed books on mathematics and I started studying them on my own. Entered college and signed up for computer science and mathematics, and realized that I just had an absolute passion for the material.
Okay.
The passion was so intense that it very much replaced the passion that I had for climbing. And ultimately it replaced the identity that I had. My identity was as a climber, an extreme climber, and it switched to a scientist.
How long after about that?
So my first patent was issued when I graduated from undergraduate school. So it was at that time period, sort of junior, senior of college, that I began thinking about designing devices for other people.
Mm-hmm. And going back a little bit, again, I mentioned these images that I saw, and then articles and talking about how you'd actually been able to customize these feet and really almost. I mean, I remember reading almost like, I have better footwork now. I these things actually work better than my feet did by themselves. What was kind of maybe some of your biggest or most memorable achievements afterwards in climbing before you maybe went down this other path? Do you remember the difference between the pre and the post in terms of your climbing level and what you accomplished with the prosthetics?
I certainly climbed better after the accident than before. A lot of my first ascents, well-known first ascents, came after the accident. So, sticky bun power is one of 512X. Stage fright, of course, came after. Vandals, the first 513 in the Northeast, came after.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So before the accident, for example, I climbed Super Crack, and I climbed it with one fall before 1980. Mm-hmm. And in those days, people would siege it and take 3 to 4 days of sieging the best climbers in the world. And I climbed it. I almost flashed it. The only reason I didn't flash it is I had a 5.4 rack and couldn't get a hex in this flared crack, and I hung in there forever. But after the accident, I would do laps on Super Crack. I would climb up, down climb it, up, and never rest for
Why were you better?
5 reps.
Why were you so much better?
More mature.
Okay.
And again, the accident was when I was 17, and I was just a more mature athlete. There were advantages of the artificial limbs. There was also a handful of disadvantages. Mm-hmm. The limbs were very light in weight. That's one advantage. But of course, I didn't have the foot ankle flexibility that I did when I had biological limbs. So I think why did I climb better? I think for the most part, it was just greater discipline and training and concentration.
Were you able to climb relatively pain-free?
It just depended on the week.
Okay.
For many, many years, the approach was the dominant crux of the ascent. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the 513 ascent. It was getting to the base. Prostheses are better today. They're more comfortable. But back then, they were quite hideous in terms of their fit.
Yeah, the interface.
Correct.
Right. So let's just switch gears then a little bit away from climbing. You're talking about how this passion, was there an altruism in it in terms of the idea of I'm going to make the world better and I'm going to make this all work for people better?
Right. So a rescuer, Albert Dow, died. He was struck by an avalanche in the when I was 17 on the Mount Washington accident. So I struggled with guilt for a very long time. And I was very, very angry with myself for the accident, for a sequence of decisions that led to the tragedy. So I most certainly wanted to do something important with my life. I was very motivated by the memory of Albert Dow and the extraordinary man he was. Albert was very, very giving, very, very loving human being. So out of his respect for his memory, I marched towards this vision of how technology can heal people, can repair people, and even extend human capability beyond innate physiological levels.
Did you, here we are now, you're literally world famous in your field. What is your relationship with the accident and with his death? Is it, what is your relationship with it now? And do you feel like do you wake up and go, yeah, I've done well. I've done well by his memory now. And was there a point where maybe you could put a little bit of that guilt behind you, or a specific point, or a specific achievement?
Yeah, I think the guilt transitioned to more of a passion and a mission in life. But that process took many, many, many years. How do I feel today? It's, when one realizes the impact that one has on the world, on others, both good and both bad, it's very humbling to think that one's decisions can have such a pronounced impact on humanity. And it was just what I feel now is a tremendous realization of that truth and a tremendous feelings of responsibility and a wish that my actions now and in the future will in the net improve humanity, not degrade humanity.
And these philosophies, again, we've got this arc of this, passion for excellence or discipline towards excellence runs through all this sort of thing. But you're also a father.
Yes.
A husband, father to two daughters, yes?
Correct.
Yeah. And so, just as a father myself and a relatively new father, where does this translate into that world, if you're willing to talk about that in terms of raising kids? You're obviously extremely demanding on yourself. You've said that in so many words. When talking about love, when talking about relationships, how does that fit into there? Because, it's somebody else maybe that those demands could translate out into the outer world and maybe poison relationships in a way. So I'm just curious, your philosophy about raising two people into this world that you've so profoundly affected yourself and have seen your ability to affect. How do you raise a couple kids into that world that you found?
Yeah, so my daughters are Sage and Alex. They're extraordinary Amazons. With their mother, Trish Herr, they've done remarkable treks and mountain climbs all over Europe and North America. So they're tearing up the mountains as I did when I was younger. I try to be very, very respectful of my children. I try to view them as individuals, and I try to respect their freedoms as individuals. I think it's completely wrong for a parent to impose their ambitions on their child. So I don't believe I do that, and I certainly hope that I do not do that. I love being a father. I love being a papa. I think for most human beings, their greatest impact in the world is because they have children. And if they do a reasonable job with their children, it's by far their most pronounced influence on the world. So I think parenting is serious business, and it's something I feel adults need to really focus on and get right, because it's important.
Your proudest moments or your proudest achievements in terms of your engineering, in terms of the artificial limbs, what are your, it's just like your climbs, what are your sort of greatest hits, your greatest ascents in your mind that you could say, here's this thing that changed the way people look at this?
So as an MIT scientist, we're in the business of expanding knowledge, doing science and expanding knowledge. We're also in the business of actually engineering and developing technology that impacts the world that we live in today. So I've done both. The latter contribution is called innovation. Innovation is very, very hard. So I've invented hundreds of times, but I've only innovated twice in my life. And innovation, of course, is taking an invention and making it real to the point where society can benefit from that invention. So years ago, with a large team, we invented a computer-controlled artificial knee. That's now a product called the Rio knee, distributed globally by a company in Iceland, Reykjavik, Iceland. And it has about 20% market share. I've also, the second innovation is a foot-ankle powered bionic limb that I'm wearing two of them. that's, again, computer control that emulates muscle tendon function and enables people to walk at normal speeds and metabolic rates. That device, we fit 2,000 people. Half have been wounded U.S. soldiers. So an innovation takes me at least a decade to get done, and it takes $40, $50, $60 million per joint. And it costs some heart tissue and some gray hair. So I'm getting better at it. And I hope my future innovations will be more efficient. I can get them done in less than 10 years and so much money, but there you have it.
All right. Well, anything else you want to make sure people understand about you if they're listening to this for 45 minutes?
I just hope they got through it without falling asleep.
No, there's no way. Thank you so much for sitting down. I realize that all people's time is valuable, but this is a pretty important work that you do. So to take time out of being here at MIT and talking to me is really special, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
All right, folks, thanks for listening. Thanks to Hugh Herr, rainy day in Boston at MIT, hanging out with Hugh Herr. And I want to make sure and give a shout out to a man named Jeremiah Johnson, coincidentally, who put me in touch with Hugh, and I believe applied some pressure, perhaps, to get Hugh to sit down for some weird little teeny podcast called The Enormocast. Appreciate it, Jeremiah. I got to meet Jeremiah and his wife at the American Alpine Club dinner the night before. I went over to interview Hugh, and climber, professor at MIT. He's obviously no slouch himself. But thanks again, Jeremiah, and of course, love the name. All right, folks, a couple cautionary tales in the last 2 episodes. Please be safe out there. Do not lose body parts to climbing. More importantly, do not lose your life to climbing. So please be extra safe out there. I don't know, that doesn't even make sense. Just be safe. Be extra safe. You can't be extra safe because that implies that you were not as safe another time. So just do it all. Make sure you know what you're doing. And I want you to climb hard. I want you to push your limits, but I also want you to take it easy and make sure you have things in hand before you leave the ground. So do your best, become home alive, and of course, check your knot.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology.
The teachers told me that's where it's at.